If you're interested in animation, if you want to look at it from an art perspective, I think it's a must-watch film. Is it a must-watch film from a life perspective? Hey everybody, my name is Nick. I'm a director and editor, and I want to recommend a movie that you could watch for Halloween, for this scary horror movie season, Grave of the Fireflies. If you haven't heard of this movie, it might sound like this is a sequel to Silence of the Lambs, like a movie about serial killers, some kind of horror movie. Actually, no. This is a cartoon that was made by Studio Ghibli, which also made My Neighbor Totoro. The funny thing about this movie, if you don't know anything about it, is that it's extremely depressing and upsetting. And the cover and the art around it maybe makes it look very cute. So I imagine there's many people who in the 90s went to the video store and were like, oh look honey, look at this this new cartoon from the same people that made My Neighbor Totoro. Let's buy this VHS and bring it back to show our 7-year-old child. And then they do that and they traumatize that kid for the rest of their life. It's kind of interesting because the animation and everything about it does make it seem like it's a child's movie, like a movie for children, and it is about children, but it's maybe one of the most upsetting, depressing movies I've ever seen in my life. And if you've seen it, you kind of know the reason why. So spoilers in this review, because this movie came out in 1988, I think. So, you know, I'm gonna spoil it. Also, if you don't know what it's about, I need to spoil it for you so you do not show it to your children. It's about World War II in Japan, and America firebombed Tokyo. When this happened, you know, a lot of people's homes were lost and a lot of people's families were destroyed. And of course, the fathers of these families are off fighting war. So there were a lot of orphan children. This film centers around two such orphaned children, an older brother and a younger sister, whose home gets burned down. Their mother dies in a pretty gruesome fashion. This is the first moment of the film where you start to think like, whoa, what? Because you get a lot of cutesy stuff with this very cute daughter with these big round cheeks, and she's crying and she's being cute, funny. And then, you know, I think it's like maybe 30 minutes into the movie, we see the burned corpse of their mother with like maggots coming out of her face and stuff like that. And it's drawn very detailed and realistically because the animation in this film is fantastic. And so that's the moment where you're like, whoa, maybe we should turn this off and stop showing our 7-year-old this movie. And as an adult, you watch it and you're like, whoa, dude. Later on, the brother goes to live with the aunt, which is the sister of the father who's fighting at war. And the aunt at first is okay to take these kids in, but when she finds out that the mother is dead, she starts to feel like these children are a burden to her, and she doesn't feed them as well because it's wartime, there's not enough rations coming in, so the children end up running away from this home and living in a cave and trying to fend for themselves, and in doing so, the daughter, the younger sister, slowly starves to death first, and then the brother slowly starves to death. So it's a movie about children starving to death. The movie is described by many as being like an anti-war movie, and it definitely is that because what happens to these children is the result of the war. But the war isn't so much a big part of this. I think the real big part of this movie is discussing the idea of poverty and people in the lower classes. People that have gotten into a circumstance that is largely out of their control, and some of it is in their control, but they need help from people, and the willingness of other characters to help them only goes so far. And it definitely mirrors our society because we are so concerned with ourselves that it's easy to forget about people that really need our help. And maybe from one sense we think, oh, they don't deserve our help because the young boy, he could have lived with his aunt and he's choosing to steal food and all these things that he's doing that are technically wrong. He's supposed to be taking care of his sister and he's making the wrong choices. But also, it's easy to forget that this is a child. So how could he know what the right thing to do would be? He's just trying his best. He's trying to make his younger sister happy. And in doing so, he ends up killing her. And I think the real interesting commentary about this film comes in the idea that a lot of people who watch it end up getting upset at the brother. And they say like, oh, this is his fault. This movie is about how stupid he is. And if he had just stayed with the aunt, or if he had just gone to Tokyo, or gone back to Tokyo, or done whatever, not lived in a cave, you know, tried to live with the old man. There's many of things along the way that he could have done to save his life. But it's interesting that that is the criticism that we levy. And it really mirrors to me the way that people who are middle class, upper class, whatever, think about people in poverty. You know, we think a lot of times like, well, why are they in that situation? They must have made some mistakes, and I wouldn't make that mistake. So therefore, you know, it's not my responsibility to take care of them. And in a way, you can't save everyone. You couldn't give food to every person that was starving during World War II in Japan. I mean, it's just not possible. But to have base level compassion is possible for an individual that you meet, and be able to give somebody food and not look down on them. There's a lot of instances in this movie of the other characters looking down on these two poor kids, and it's an indictment, I would say, of the audience and of us and the way that we treat people in lower classes and think about them. What the movie does is it flips the perspective of us. We are with these children who are struggling. They're struggling day to day to meet their needs. They need to find food. They're eating frogs. They're eating, you know, roots from the ground. They're doing all these things to try to survive. And very rarely do we see people who are well off, who are doing okay in this society. They're in the background. You know, the boy will break into a home and steal from a rich person, but he never sees the rich people. He only sees like their photo on the mantle. And there's a great scene later on in the film where from a very, very far away, we see these wealthy people going to their lake house and looking out over the lake, where off on the side of the lake is the cave that the young boy and the young girl were living in. And we get this far away perspective of these wealthy people looking off and having an okay time and having a good time and being happy and enjoying their life and looking out at the beautiful lake and feeling peaceful. And we are flipped and put into the perspective of the poor, the struggling, looking at these wealthy people as something that is so outside of our experience, which is normally the reverse. You know, normally as people that are, you know, have iPhones, are doing okay in our life, you know, maybe, I'm not saying everybody's doing great, but, you know, meeting our basic needs. We're eating, we have 3 meals a day, we live in a house, we have a bed, we have a blanket, we're not going to starve. You know, it's easy to see people that are struggling and think about it as something so removed from us, so far away in the distance that we know is there, but we can look at for a second and then forget about. And that is what the brother and the young sister are doing with these rich people. They look at it for a second and they think, wow, it must be nice to eat a steak or whatever. And then that thought floats away from their mind, because what they're really focused on is just surviving. And I think it's a really interesting, cool perspective that this film gives us. And so I think if you were to rewatch this film, if you were brave enough to rewatch this film, take a look at that when you watch it again and think about how the director of this movie is shifting our perspective and how he's showing us ourselves by omitting ourselves. Does that make sense? Like, we're in the background of this movie. The well-off people, the people that have survived, the people that didn't starve to death. We're in the background. We're not present. So now we get to see the life of the people that are all gone. And at the end of the film, when all of the fireflies of the souls of all of the people that have passed away and starved throughout history are rising up, we understand that there are so many of this. There's so many stories like the story that we're seeing in this movie. This is not a unique, like amazing, crazy situation. This is a real thing that happened not just to maybe 1 or 2 people. This is something that happens all throughout history on a mass scale, and these people are forgotten because they're gone. Who's telling their story? No one's telling their story. In that way, I think it's a very moving film, and I think in that way, it's good to think about it, to stop your criticism of judging these people for doing the wrong thing. Because by luck, your family and your family line was not put in this situation. I think the animation is the thing that really makes this film moving and really affecting, because we start out with this very cute, fat-faced child who's running around, and the animation of her is so realistic and as a cute little child would be. She cries in a way that's very realistic. She does these things. She's running around. She's goofing off. She's jumping and spinning around, and the animation is fantastic. And because the animation is so good and so realistic, it makes the deterioration of the starvation that much more affecting. We feel this child wasting away. The final scene, one of the final scenes where she is starving to death, is so well animated. She's shaking. It's honestly maybe the most disturbing scene in a film that I've ever seen. And the reason I'm not crying right now is because it's upsetting, really. And maybe I've been laughing a little bit throughout this. It's just because it's so uncomfortable to sit through watching I don't know, she was 4 or something, a 4-year-old waste away and starve to death in a realistic fashion. Even the fact that this movie is a cartoon, it's drawings, it doesn't really help bridge, make you feel less disturbed, because it's animated so realistically. I suppose if you are studying animation and how to create real human actions and ways that people move, you should study this film, because you feel like you're watching a person. It doesn't feel like a cartoon at a certain point. Even though the people look, there's this aesthetic to it, this cutesy aesthetic, but then you see the way she moves and the way that she talks, and she's got out of breath. It's very disturbing and upsetting, and I would say borderline too good. The animation is too good, because if it was a little bit dialed back just a little bit, then you wouldn't feel as much. So maybe that's the thing that makes this movie work, is they committed full on to being like, look, we're not gonna hide any of this. We're not gonna, even though this is a 4-year-old child we're drawing, we're gonna show you the reality of what it would be like to see a 4-year-old starve to death. Now, is that something you wanna watch? I would guess probably not. Although if you're interested in animation, if you wanna look at it from an art perspective, I think it's a must-watch film. Is it a must-watch film from a life perspective? Probably not. I would say I wouldn't recommend this movie to many people. I wouldn't say hey, let's watch Grave of the Fireflies. We got to see this. This is such a good movie. You should come watch this with me. I wouldn't do that. So it's up to you. Do you want to watch this? I don't know. I think it's a very good movie, but a movie that maybe doesn't need to be seen. I don't know. Unless you care about the themes of the film. So rent this, show it to your children on Halloween. All right, see you guys next time. Bye.